The Houthis in Yemen launched 2 ballistic missiles at Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Qnews warns that Israel will intensify its Gaza offensive if Hamas rejects a detainee deal. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says smartphones, computers and semiconductors may face separate tariffs within a month. The Houthis in Yemen have launched 2 ballistic missiles at Israel. The Israeli occupation said air defenses launched interceptor missiles at the incoming projectiles, but the results of the interceptions are still under investigation. There are no immediate reports of injuries or damage in the attack. Sirens had sounded across central Israel, Jerusalem, and some West Bank settlements. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Qnews warned Hamas that if it refuses to agree to a detainees deal, Israel's offensive in Gaza will intensify. The Israeli Defense Minister added that the main goal of the operations is to pressure Hamas to return to the detainee release agreement. And for more analysis, we now move on to Salma Marwan in our newsroom. Salma?
Thank you, Rana. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the international relations expert, Dr. Muhammad Osman. Dr. Osman, thank you so much for joining us. And first off, since we're approaching a new round of ceasefire talks, what are your expectations regarding its flow? And what are the strategic implications of Israel's threat to intensify its offensive in Gaza if Hamas rejects the detainee deal?
Thank you for having me, Salma. Always a pleasure to be with you. It seems that the Israeli government has a conviction that applying military pressure will result in the eventual release of the remaining detainees and the hostages inside the Gaza Strip. However, of course, if you come to judge that methodologically, in a logical manner, we might find that this will not yield the required results, and it will actually lead to the death of the remaining hostages. There are about 59 detainees inside the Gaza Strip. Only 24 of them are alive. However, I think that this is only the announced goal of the Israeli government. The actual goal is much more sinister. It is to destroy what remains of means of life inside the Gaza Strip in order to render it uninhabitable and to push forward for the so-called voluntary relocation of the Palestinians, which is basically a covert ethnic cleansing scheme.
Mm-hmm. Now, Hamas has also warned Israel if it returns to its aggression on Gaza following the completion of a detainee exchange deal. How do you interpret this warning, and how might Hamas respond to the increased pressure from Israel regarding the detainee negotiations?
It seems that the Israeli army of occupation already is applying a gradual ground campaign inside the Gaza Strip, where they are expanding their areas of control. They have already established the so-called Mirage corridor in southern Gaza, isolating Rafah and severing its connection with the rest of the Gaza Strip. And by that, they have basically annexed about 20% of the entirety of Gaza into a so-called security buffer zone. And now they are expanding their ground incursions into northern Gaza in the areas of Shaja'iyya, in the areas of Al-Tufah, Beit Lahia, Beit Hadul, and others, basically to reduce the geographical territory of the Gaza Strip. And by that, they are applying pressure not only on Hamas, but also on the local civilian population. And by that, they think that they can force Hamas to release the remaining detainees and agree to a ceasefire that is more agreeable and favorable to Israeli terms and ultimate goals from the war of aggression on Gaza. I think this is the Israeli strategy so far. And also, as I said before, it is also a means by which they can force the people to leave the Gaza Strip to relocate to other areas. It's part of the forced displacement scheme that has been pushed forward or proposed by the Trump administration and is being actively implemented by Netanyahu's government.
Now, moving on to the Houthis' ballistic missiles at Israel, what are the potential regional consequences of this?
Well, the only regional consequences are more destabilization of the situation in the larger Middle East. Already, the Houthi attacks on maritime routes in the southern Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, and the Gulf of Aden has caused substantial damage to the freedom of navigation in this area. It has decreased from 25,000 vessels annually to slightly less than 10,000 vessels annually in 2024. And this, of course, has prompted the United States to use this as a pretext in order to carry out its own military campaign against the Houthis, which only intensified when President Trump was elected. And now the U.S. military is eviscerating the parts of Yemen that are under Houthi control, and the Houthis are basically being backed into a corner, especially with the increased pressure on Iran, and Iran apparently backing down. And according to some Western media sources, they have already reduced aid to the Houthi movement. So I think that the Houthis are in dire straits, and maybe even local actors inside Yemen might take matters into their own hand and attempt to overthrow the Houthis once and for all in their areas of control. However, and on the other hand, what the Houthis are doing is not really impacting Israel in any way. Most of the projectiles they launch against Israel, whether drones or rockets or missiles, get intercepted and shot down midway. One of them was just shot the other day over Jordan, which caused a local fire inside Jordan, which it hardly looks like pressuring the Israelis to me. So its only regional implications will be more pressure on Iran and more pressure on the Houthis themselves, and more harm and damage to the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea.
Lastly, sir, what role might international actors play in de-escalating both the Gaza conflict and the continuous missiles threat from Yemen?
I think that the root causes of all problems is the conflict in Gaza. Once we have a ceasefire in Gaza, a conclusive, definitive ceasefire, we might see a larger lull in the region of some sort. And we have seen that when the ceasefire was implemented, or the truce for over 57 days, there were no missiles launched against vessels in the Red Sea by the Houthis. There were no missiles launched from Lebanon or Syria or Iraq against Israeli or American targets. So ending the conflict in Gaza serves to de-escalate the entire situation in the region. And I think that the only actor that might actually ensure that is the United States. The United States so far has chosen not to apply any pressure on Israel in order for them to go back to abiding by the ceasefire agreement. And so far they have empowered Israel in all of their escalatory schemes so far. The moment the United States decides to take a different course of action, we might see more calm and tranquility in the region.
Mm-hmm. From Cairo, that was international relations expert Dr. Muhammad Osman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. And now we go back to Rana in our studio.
Thank you so much, Salma. 2 Israeli missiles have struck a building inside the main hospital in Gaza, destroying the emergency and reception department and damaging several other structures. The airstrikes demolished the hospital's emergency unit, main entrance, and the facility housing medical oxygen for intensive care patients. The attack took place overnight as medical staff were urgently working to evacuate hundreds of patients from the hospital. Egypt's Ministry of Foreign Affairs have strongly condemned Israel's bombing of Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza. In an official statement, the Ministry of Immigration and Egyptian Expatriate Affairs called for an immediate halt to all Israeli military operations in the Gaza Strip. The ministry also urged the urgent entry of humanitarian and relief aid to support the people of Gaza, warning that current Israeli actions risk triggering a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe for which Israel would bear full responsibility. The government media office in Gaza has condemned the bombing of a hospital in Gaza City, describing it as a heinous crime against a key medical facility. Al Ahli Hospital, one of the oldest and most vital in the Strip, serves then 1 million people and was heavily damaged in the strike. The media office stated that Israeli forces have destroyed 34 hospitals since the start of the conflict, calling the continued targeting of medical centers a violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions. Hamas has condemned the Israeli strike on Al Ahli Hospital, calling it a new war crime and accusing the Israeli military of disregarding humanitarian laws and norms. The group also held the United States responsible, claiming Israel operates under U.S. diplomatic cover, with Washington obstructing international accountability efforts. The European Union has voiced deep concern over worsening humanitarian conditions in Gaza, urging Israel to lift the total blockade imposed on March the 2nd. The EU condemned the killing of 15 paramedics in an Israeli strike on March the 23rd and called for accountability. The bloc also warned that food supplies brought in during the ceasefire are nearly depleted, stressing that international humanitarian law requires aid to reach civilians in need. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees has warned that all essential supplies in Gaza are nearly depleted, raising fears that even infants are going to bed hungry. In a statement, Juliette Thoma, UNRWA's Director of Communications, called for immediate international action to prevent the worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Thoma emphasized that 6 weeks into the Israeli-imposed blockade, which has halted both humanitarian aid and commercial supplies, food stocks are nearly exhausted. She reported that bakeries have shut down and hunger is spreading rapidly among the population. Israeli forces have forcibly evicted several Palestinian families from their homes on the outskirts of the Noor al-Shams refugee camp east of Tulqaram. Residents were reportedly given a final deadline of 7 a.m. to evacuate amid heavy gunfire aimed at intimidating the local population. 1 day earlier, families in the nearby Jabal al-Nasr neighborhood faced similar eviction orders. In some cases, residents were forced to buy water tanks from Israeli soldiers as a condition to remain in their homes. Israeli authorities have prevented Palestinian Christian worshippers from the West Bank from entering occupied Jerusalem to attend Palm Sunday services. Access to the holy city was heavily restricted under ongoing Israeli limitations on Palestinian freedom of movement. Strict military measures were enforced at checkpoints around Jerusalem and the Old City, further limiting entry for worshippers. Egypt has welcomed Oman's hosting of the upcoming direct nuclear talks between the United States and Iran, setting to begin next time. In a statement, the Ministry of Immigration and Egyptian Expatriate Affairs praised Oman's ongoing role in promoting political and peaceful solutions amid escalating regional challenges. The ministry reaffirmed Egypt's full support for dialogue-based efforts to defuse tensions and prevent further escalation, stressing that military solutions will only worsen regional crises. Furthermore, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati held phone talks with his Omani and Iranian counterparts, as well as U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, to discuss recent regional developments, especially the U.S.-Iran talks in Muscat. Abdulati praised Oman's vital role in mediation and reiterated Egypt's full support for efforts aimed at achieving political solutions through dialogue and negotiations. He also expressed Egypt's appreciation for both U.S. and Iranian efforts to ease regional tensions and promote stability. U.S. President Donald Trump has described ongoing talks with Iran over its nuclear program as going okay. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump said the situation is progressing, but emphasized that nothing truly matters until an agreement is reached. He expressed cautious optimism, noting that the talks are going reasonably well. Iran and the United States have agreed to reconvene talks next week, following what Tehran described as productive discussions in Oman. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arqachi called the meeting a positive and calm exchange, marking the first direct talks between Iran and the Trump administration, including during his first term. Arqachi confirmed both sides agreed to continue the dialogue and reported a brief encounter between the Iranian delegation and U.S. officials, led by Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, after the talks concluded.
حدود 2 ساعت و نیم طول کشید و به نظرم چیز معمولی بود. ما در هنگام خروج خب دو تا هیئت با هم برخورد داشتند و ما یک چند دقیقه رو گفتگو کردیم.
Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said and stated that he doesn't expect this round of talks to be long. He said that this is just the beginning, so it's not that at this stage the parties are communicating their basic positions to the Omani mediator. Oman has long served as an intermediate between Western powers and Iran, having brokered the release of several foreign and dual nationals held by the Republic. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has said the United States and Saudi Arabia will sign a preliminary agreement on energy cooperation and civil nuclear technology. The U.S. official said the details on nuclear cooperation between two countries would come later this year. He said the cooperation will focus on building a commercial nuclear power industry in the kingdom, with meaningful developments expected this year. Wright also praised the kingdom's approach to efficient energy development and said it applied it to all energy sources. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that the smartphones, computers, and some other electronics will come under separate tariffs, along with semiconductors that may be imposed in a month or so. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration granted exclusions from steep tariffs on such products imported largely from China, providing a big break to tech firms like Apple that rely on imported products. United States Customs and Border Protection Agency notice of tariff codes excluded from the import taxes feature 20 product categories, including the broad 8,471 code for all computers, laptops, disk drives, automatic data processing.
The reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs.
The Trump administration has granted tariff exclusions for smartphones, computers and other electronics imported, supplied largely from China, sparing them from President Donald Trump's steep 125 duties. In a notice to shippers issued late on Friday, April the 11th, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency published a list of tariff codes that will be excluded from the duties. CBP listed 20 product categories, including the very broad 8,471 code for all computers, laptops, disks, drives and automatic data processing. It also included semiconductors, devices, equipment, memory chips and flat panel displays. Business Minister Jonathan Reynolds has said China is no longer welcome in Britain's steel sector after the government had to pass emergency legislation to ensure control of Chinese-owned British steel. Reynolds said the refusal of China's group to accept a roughly £500 million government aid package last week to stop the damage to blast the furnaces left the government with no alternative to intervening directly. He bought British steels from the government in 2020 after the company became insolvent.
We made a substantial offer that was comparable to the work.
Britain's upper house thinking gave assent to legislation to allow the government to take control of British steel and keep its blast furnaces open. Speaker of the House of Commons announced in Parliament that the full nationalisation of the United Kingdom's last virgin steelmaker is increasingly likely. Owned by China's group, the company employs 3,500 people at its South Top plant, which faces uncertainty after failing to funding talks for greener production. Lawmakers were recalling from Easter recess to pass a law allowing the government to take control, ensure wages are paid and keep the blast furnace operating.
Act 2025. Before I adjourn the House, can I once again pass on my thanks to all the staff of the House who have worked extra.
Chinese banks have extended 3.64 trillion yuan, $500 billion in new yuan loans in March. For the first quarter, total new loans rose to 9.78 trillion yuan from 9.46 trillion yuan in the same period last year. Outstanding yuan loans rose 7.4% in March from a year earlier, up from a 7.3% pace in February. Analysts has expected growth to remain steady. Finance Minister Eric Lombard has said France's plan to lower its budget deficit to 4.6% of economic output in 2026 from 5.4% this year implies finding 40 billion euros of saving. France, the Eurozone's second biggest economy, is targeting a gradual reduction in its budget deficit in order to meet EU rules. As a first step, it wants to trim the deficit to 5.4% of economic output this year from 5.8% last year, with a view to bringing the shortfall in line with the EU ceiling of 3% by 2029. France cut its 2025 economic growth forecast to 0.7% from 0.9% on Wednesday, reflecting uncertainty from the global trade war caused by the United States President Donald Trump's tariffs. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. The Houthis in Yemen launched 2 ballistic missiles at Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warns that Israel will intensify its Gaza offensive if Hamas rejects a detainee deal. And U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says smartphones, computers and semiconductors may face separate tariffs within 1 month. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour and our transmission for today. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNewEG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching, and until we meet again at 4 p.m. Car local time tomorrow, it's goodbye. I'm Raul Khassas.